Afternoon. Oh, I like it. Even though it's the last days, you sound really good. Before we start, let's bow our head for prayer. Father in heavens, and thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for Amanda being here, and I lift her up in a special way. And Lord Jesus, there's nothing impossible for us when we journey with you. Abide with us and walk with us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. I want to welcome all of you again. And you know, today is, like I told Amanda, this is a bittersweet. You know, and I've learned so much, you know, from Amanda, because like I said, mental health, or to me, it's related to mental health. I'm not in it, and I learned so much. And what I gathered in the past 4 days, I'm sure today, that nothing is impossible with God. You know, as long as we walk with Him, invite Him to be with us and to help us to overcome whatever that encounter in our problem. Amanda, even though this is the last day, please do come back. This is your home. This is the Wisconsin Conference embrace you. And we love you, and thank you for being here.
Well, it's like she said, it's kind of bittersweet. We're at the end of our time here together. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you about probably my favorite topic, not because I like it so much more than everything else, but because it's the foundation of everything else I've talked about up to this point. But I saved it for the end because I thought it would be a good way to tie everything we've already talked about together. Now, does anybody know what is particularly special about this year? Something that happens every 4 years? Okay, that is one thing, but there's something else that happens every 4 years that's about to take place soon. The Olympics, yes. And one of the things that not many people realize about the Olympics is that every one of the athletes that's involved in the Olympics has somebody that they really, really lean on. Does anybody know who I'm talking about? Who helps them prepare? Their coaches. And some of them, even if not most of them, actually have psychologists that they work with. Or their coaches are trained to be pseudo-psychologists to their athletes. Do you know why that is? It could be stress, yes. Being in the Olympics is probably quite stressful. But the reason is you can excel at something, but if your mind isn't in it, disaster can happen. One of the ways that we see this, I know I said every 4 years, but technically it's every 2 years because we have the Summer Olympics, and then 2 years later we have the Winter Olympics, and then we have the summer and winter. But you can especially see this when you watch, has anybody ever watched ice skating in the Olympics? And oftentimes they'll replay something over and over again. What do they often replay over and over again? Falling, yes. When somebody falls, they'll play it over and over again, and I think, wow. You know, that's really sad that we get to watch it over and over again. Sometimes you'll even re-watch it from different angles. I remember one time, this was years ago, it was like couples skating or something like that. And there was a couple out on the, I don't think they were the American team, but they were out there. And it was a position where the female skater had her arms back like this, and the male skater tripped and didn't let go of her, and she face planted into the ice. And they showed it like 5 times. They went to commercial and they came back and showed it 5 more times from all the different angles of the cameras. And I thought, oh, that's awful. But oftentimes when they're narrating or officiating the Olympics and they're showing those playbacks, what do they often do? They talk about whether or not the person's head's going to be in the game or be able to skate after that and finish their whole routine without messing up again, because what happens when you fall? A lot of times we're tempted to not want to get back up or not try like we had originally started out. And this is one of the reasons why coaches and psychologists are so important to athletes. Because I can have the capacity to do all kinds of things, but if my head isn't in it, how good am I going to be as an athlete? Ironically, I even worked with an Olympic hopeful years ago. This person, I can't say too much about them, but this person had some injuries and all sorts of things that kept them from being able to go all the way to the Olympics, but they were really close. And a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety came out of this situation. And even sometimes athletes, after they finish, when their career is over, they'll experience depression and anxiety, because they've put so much energy into this sport. And what happens when you're like 20 years old and you've spent all your life planning for this and now it's over? Like every waking moment is preparing for these things. So a lot of what people experience is not just whether we're able to do something, it's whether our head is in it too, or our mind or our thinking. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to share something. I'm going to ask you some questions. Does anybody remember learning how to do this? You remember learning how to say please and thank you? Hopefully you do. That's one of the things we all learned when we were younger. Please, can I have that? Thank you for offering or giving it to me. My dad loved to make us write thank you cards when we were younger. I wish I had a better habit of doing that. Unfortunately, with computers and screens and everything, it's harder to handwrite things, but I have friends that are really good at this. How about this one? Did you all learn how to brush your teeth and wash your hands? I hope so. Gonna make a lot more friends if you know how to brush your teeth and wash your hands. But this is something we even had to learn again in terms of washing our hands, because during COVID, there's all this new information about how we're supposed to wash our hands. Does anybody remember what we're supposed to do during COVID? We're supposed to wash our hands while singing happy birthday. That was about the time amount we were supposed to spend doing it. I don't know what it is about sounds I get when I'm up here, but that's a beautiful sound, the rain, isn't it? Yes, so we all learned how to brush our teeth and wash our hands, and we should do that quite often. How about this one? What is this one about? Stop, look, and listen. Crossing the street. I've never done it so much as I've done it here at camp meeting, because we're staying across the street, and so my husband and I keep having to look, stop, look, and listen every time we go across the street. But this is something really important that you have to learn. How about this one? Stop, drop, and roll. Fire, yeah, if there's a fire, we have to learn how to stop, drop, and roll. Do you remember learning this in school? I don't remember my parents telling me to do this. I remember my teacher in elementary school teaching me how to do this. Has anybody ever had to use this? Raise your hand if you've had to use this. Oh, you actually got caught on fire and you had to stop, drop, and roll? There's usually like one person in the whole audience, no matter what size audience I have, there's always like one person I'm thinking, how did that happen? That's never happened to me, and I don't know anybody. Now I know a few people, but not too many have ever had to learn or had to do this. And yet, how much time did we go through learning how to do this? Even I grew up in California, so what do you think we also learned? Earthquakes, how to respond to an earthquake. And I hear even that has changed. It used to be where you get under your desk or, put your hands over your head. Now I hear there's a triangle rule or something like that. I should probably learn this since I still live in California. But you don't want to get under something, you want to get beside it, because the idea that if the roof comes down, you want to be in the triangle of safety so that things fall this way or that way versus crushing you underneath it. So I don't know too much about that, but I'll learn some more maybe when I get home. But this is something that hardly any of us learn, and yet it's the thing we do all day, every day. And it's not literally washing your brain, but it's mental hygiene, and more specifically, how to think. How many of you grew up, and in the midst of your growing up experience, had somebody sit you down and say, hey, by the way, I want you to know this is how you think? I remember hearing, my dad used to share some things every once in a while about thinking, but he didn't specifically sit me down and say, hey, Amanda, if you want to do well in life, this is how you think. And yet, do you know how often we think during the day, throughout the day? Some people say it's between 12,000 and 80,000 thoughts that we have in a given day. Can you believe that? Now, if you tend towards anxiety, you're probably more the 80,000 range. Because if you have anxiety, people tend to have, they go over their thoughts and over their thoughts. But you are thinking all the time, even when you don't realize you are. And that's how much we think. And yet, how little did we learn how to do this? Hardly anybody. In fact, most people who come to my group or my practice, they'll often say, nobody ever taught me how to do this. I can't believe I'm learning this for the first time. And sometimes I have people who are 80-something years old, 90 years old, and it's the first time somebody has ever taught them how to think. We're about to start a deluge, aren't we? But this is something that has been around for ages. Now, someone by the name of Aaron Beck came up with something we call cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy came out in the 1960s. But I think this concept has been around even longer that. And this concept is that every single one of our thoughts has an effect on how we feel and how we act or how we behave. So all of our thoughts, some people will even say, depression and anxiety, they're not mood disorders, they're cognitive disorders. So what does that mean? It's not a problem with your mood or your feelings, it's a problem with your thoughts, because out of our thoughts come our feelings. And so this is something that is really powerful in our lives, and yet we think in some cases, especially people who don't follow the Bible, they think, this is something that came about with Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive behavioral therapy, or even as far back as Socrates and Epictetus and all the philosophers. But actually, we know, too, that this is also founded in the Bible. And we see this in Philippians 4, verse 8. It says, whatsoever things are, and I abbreviated this, whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, it says, what? These are the things that we're supposed to think on. And when you look at that list, true, honest, just, pure, lovely, of good report, how could we categorize all those things? They're positive things, not delusionally positive. They're just positive things. And what that looks like is, sometimes we're in the church and we're tempted to focus on a problem in the church. What does the Bible say we should do instead? Don't focus on all the negative things. We should be focusing on the positive things that are going on. Now, this doesn't mean we're supposed to be delusional to bad things that are going on and not correct those things, but let's just admit, some of us have a tendency towards negativity. If you ask us any question, we're going to go to the negative side instead of going to the positive side of things in terms of how we respond. What did you think of the pastor's sermon? Well, he could have said this, and he could have done this, and I didn't like the way he scratched his nose when he was talking up there. It was really, frustrating and distracting to me and everything. Instead of focusing on the positive things that came out of the sermon, right? That's just one example that we can do that. But I want to share with you some other verses that I think really prove to us that this idea of true, just, pure, lovely, good report, honest thinking epitomizes in the Bible. So here we go. We're going to look at these. And I want you to think of this in terms of the triangle too. So Psalms 94 verse 19 says, "In the multitude of my thoughts within me, thy comforts delight my soul." So we know this is the Psalms now, and who wrote many of the Psalms? David. So he says here, "In the multitude of my thoughts." Now, if we just stop there, we don't know what kind of thoughts they are. But we can tell what kinds of thoughts he's having by the results of those thoughts. And he says, "Within me thy comforts delight my soul." So based on how he's feeling, which is comforted, what kind of thoughts do you think he's having? Maybe Philippians 4 verse 8 kind of thinking? Those are the kinds of thoughts that he has. How about this one? 2 Corinthians 10 verse 7. "Do ye look on things after the outward appearance?" I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier, and we were talking about what happens as you get older. How do our bodies change as we get older? Isn't it really tempting to focus on the outward appearance? Not just other people's, but our own. As we get older, it's really tempting to look at the outward appearance, but also in general too. Isn't it easy to look at the outward appearance of certain situations? Oh, that looks bad. Even without knowing what the consequences might be or what precipitated it, we're quick to look at just how it looks on the outside. It says, "If any man trusts to himself that he is Christ's," what kind of thinking is that? Is that positive thinking? That I am Christ's? That's a great thought. It's a true thought. "Let him of himself do what? Think this again." So shouldn't we continue to think those thoughts when we have good, healthy thoughts? That as he is Christ, even so are we. So when you're tempted to look at the outward things, and by the way, the outward things are wasting away. We know that. But what are we supposed to do? Look at the fact that we're Christ's. Focus on that versus all the stuff that's going on in the world around us falling apart. How about this one? Luke 28:38. "And he said unto them," who is this talking about? Jesus. "Why are ye troubled?" Who is he talking to? He was talking to the disciples because he said, "And why do thoughts arise in your hearts?" What kinds of thoughts were they thinking? Now, what had happened at this point? Christ had been crucified. He's coming back to see them, but they don't recognize him yet. And what were they thinking? What had they thought before when Christ was on the earth? That he was going to set up a kingdom and he was going to make them, royalty in this kingdom, and they were going to get back at anybody who had done wrong to them. But that didn't happen. Christ died. And they were starting to question everything he had told them. Because what were they doing? They were looking at the outward, right? And Jesus says, "Why do thoughts arise in your hearts?" And maybe more specifically, why do these thoughts arise in your hearts? Right? How about Psalms 40, verse 5? It says, "Many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works which thou hast done." So this is interesting. God has behaviors too. But look where those behaviors come from. "And thy thoughts," did you know that God has thoughts toward us? And based on the way he thinks about us, he acts towards us. "Which are to us word." What is this saying? These are good things. God thinks good things about us, and so he does good things for us. "Which are to us word, they cannot be reckoned up in order unto thee. If I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered." In other words, what is happening here? David is counting his blessings. He's focusing on good, pure, lovely thoughts. And if this wasn't enough for you, there's another person who also had a concept of cognitive behavioral therapy too. And one of my favorite books as a therapist is a book called Mind, Character, and Personality. It's actually a compilation of her writings. But she says the same thing even before Aaron Beck came along, because we know she was around before the 1960s, right? And she says, "The thoughts and feelings of the mother will have a powerful influence upon the legacy she gives her child." What does that mean, legacy? If she has certain thoughts, doesn't she behave according to the thoughts that she has? She feels according to the thoughts that she has. It says, if she allows her mind to dwell upon her own feelings, and these are obviously negative ones, if she indulges in selfishness, if she is peevish and exacting, the disposition of her child will testify to the fact. Wow, not only does it affect her, the thoughts that she has, but it affects generations after her, right? And some of us are dealing with that generation after part. We've experienced difficult times in the past. We have thinking that goes on in our families. Some families tend to be more critical, don't they? Some families tend to be more positive. Some families tend to be more tough or hard on us. But all of these things, not only do they come out in the feelings and behaviors of the parents, but they also come out in the feelings and behaviors of the children, because don't you think they adopt those thoughts too? This is something that I share with my clients often, because when I do assessments with them, I will often ask, do you have any depression or anxiety in your family, or any mental disorder that might be prevalent in the family? And they'll kind of look down and they'll go, yeah, my mom was depressed, or my dad had terrible anxiety, almost as though now they can't help but have it themselves. And I say, I'm not asking you this just because genetically it gets passed on to children, although that does happen. But also, in addition to that, what happens when I grow up and I go through difficult times, and what I've learned to do is maybe drink to take care of the sadness. Or maybe I go into my room and I isolate to avoid the feelings that I'm going through. What happens to my children if they're watching that? Don't they learn those same behaviors and those same thinking patterns too? And so this is why she talks about it being a legacy. But it starts with the thinking. How about this one? When invalids have nothing to occupy their time and attention, their thoughts become centered upon themselves, and they grow morbid. What's another word for morbid? Maybe even suicidal. They become morbid and irritable. Some people might translate that as angry and agitated all the time. Many times they dwell upon their bad feelings until they think themselves much worse than they really are, and wholly unable to do anything. But where does that start? Right up here. How about this one? Let us place our thoughts upon holy things. Let them be pure and true. This sounds like it's coming from Philippians 4, verse 8. For the only security for any soul is what? Right thinking. When you say one thing, what does that assume? there's also wrong thinking. So we don't all just automatically get right thinking from the start. Some of us get encouraged with wrong thinking. We are to use every means that God has placed within our reach for the government and cultivation of our thoughts. This is where even we as Adventists sometimes struggle. We have the New Start principles. We have all of these things. We know them. But the one area we often struggle with is the cultivation and government of our thoughts. I can exercise all day. I can eat super well and healthy. But what happens if I'm doing all that stuff for my body, but my brain is beating itself up? I'm beating myself up. I'm attacking myself at every step of the way. I'm being negative about everything that's happening around me. Do you think it's going to be a good effect on the body? By the way, did you know every single thought in your brain has a biological effect on your body? And it even can get to the point of changing your DNA. You can literally change your DNA by just the way you think. Scary, huh? Especially when we haven't been cultivating and using proper government of our thinking. And it says, his truth will sanctify us body and soul and spirit, and we shall be enabled to rise above temptations. So temptations are a lack of, or when we actually do the temptation, what is that a lack of? Self-control. So where does self-control actually start? It actually starts in the mind. And the Bible says if you're faithful in the least of these, you'll be faithful in much. Maybe the least of these is our thinking. Maybe it starts with our thinking, and then we'll be faithful in much, meaning the outward manifestation of those thoughts will be right. Just a thought. But how do we change our thinking? This is so hard. Today is going to be very practical. I'm a practical person, and I love to do practical things. So I'm going to teach you how to actually think. Anybody want to learn how to think tonight? Or today-ish? Tonight-ish? Yeah, I'm so grateful I learned this, and this is one of my favorite things to teach because, like I said before, it is the foundation of everything that we do. If we don't know how to think right, we're not going to feel right, we're not going to act right. So let's get our thinking taken care of, and then you guys will be free to go, and you'll just live really productive, awesome lives. You'll be ministering for God in the most powerful ways, and nothing will be able to stop you, right? Okay, so this is a sheet that I give all of my clients. Some of you, I know, can probably even recognize this. But this is a sheet, and I'm going to tell you how to get this sheet. So you can even go online and download it, but I'm going to wait till the end to share that with you. Otherwise, a bunch of people are going to be on their phones trying to find it, and I don't want to lose you. So this sheet is what I call the ABCs of cognitive behavioral therapy. So I do want to make a disclaimer. Sometimes when I talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, people will go out there and read everything and think maybe that I'm endorsing everything that you find on the internet and every single thing you find in a book on cognitive behavioral therapy. But I want to tell you that I endorse this part, but there is a way that man comes along and finds ways to, let's say, muddy the waters. And so I am not endorsing all of cognitive behavioral therapy because it has grown and expanded and people have come along and brought things into the practice that I don't endorse as a Christian and a Seventh-day Adventist. So I want you to know the stuff that I'm sharing with you right now is something that I endorse, and I do believe we can learn things from people who aren't even necessarily Adventist or Christian, but I don't want you to go excitedly out into the world and go, give me everything CBT and I'll just take it in because Amanda said it's good. Okay? Does everybody get that? Because I feel a huge responsibility as somebody who speaks that I don't lead people astray. And so if you ever have a problem with something that I say, please be nice, but come along and tell me why, and give me some good resource as to why, or reference as to why that is. But I do believe in this, and I believe it's very helpful, okay? So this is the ABCs of cognitive behavioral therapy, and each letter of the first 5 letters of the alphabet stands for something different that's going to help us think better. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is the A, because it's the first letter of the alphabet. And the A stands for activating event. If you want to take notes, that's great. Activating events are anything that happens all day, every day to us throughout the day. Anything. But sometimes people, instead of calling them activating events, they like to call them stressors or triggers. Now, when you hear stressor or trigger, we talked about stress the other day, but when you hear stressor or trigger, usually we're talking about things that are maybe negative that are happening, or things that are difficult that are going on in our lives. And so this is why we call them stressors or triggers, but actually even good things can be activating events. It doesn't have to be a negative thing, but I don't think you guys have a problem with the good stuff that happens, so we're just going to focus on the difficult things that happen that might be considered triggers or stressors. But there's 2 categories of triggers and stressors or activating events that we experience. The first one that we're going to talk about, and this isn't in any particular order, the first one is what we call external activating events. Now, external has to do with things outside of us. So we're going to boil this down to 2 things. What are the things outside of us? People. Do you all have certain people in your life that might be a little more difficult to deal with? Yes. I don't know if you're, putting a list of people down in your mind right now, but I don't want you to just think of the people that you don't like. But when you think of these people, there are people that you might love that can also be a trigger or a stressor or an activating event at times. So this could be, maybe the spouse that slurps their food every once in a while. And you're like, oh, I wish they wouldn't do that. It's so grating, Or maybe somebody in your family that every time they call, they say the same thing, or they talk about the same story, or something like that. You love this person, but it's a trigger or a stressor when you experience that thing that they do. The reason I say this is because I don't want you to think only difficult people or hard people are the only ones that can be triggers and stressors. Because we're experiencing these all day, every day. We're also responding to these things all day, every day. And so don't we need to learn how to respond more appropriately when we don't respond well to these triggers and stressors? But you're not going to learn how to do that if you don't first acknowledge that it's a trigger and a stressor to you. Now, some of you are going to be very tempted to go home and say, see, honey, you do this all the time. I am not talking about this so that you can blame the other person. I want you to remember this is your trigger and stressor. That person may not trigger another person the same way they do you. Not because of anything that they're doing differently, but because of the way it affects you, right? So this is for you, not for them. Yes, maybe you can have a conversation about it later, but this is specifically for you to see how things affect you, okay? Because we can't change people necessarily, but we can change ourselves and how things affect us. But the other thing that we also have that's external is circumstances. Do any of you love the rain? Raise your hand if you love the rain. Anybody not like the rain so much? Okay, do you all agree with the weather? No, you don't. So some people might be triggered by the rain, some people might love the rain. I mean, we all respond differently to it, but we're not all affected the same way by it. And so even weather can be a circumstance. How about traffic? I mean, I remember years ago, I was living in the Bay Area of California, so between San Jose and San Francisco, and if you've ever been there, have any of you ever been there? What is traffic like there? Crazy traffic. Maybe not as bad as the 405 in LA, the 405 freeway. We say the 405, you can tell I'm from California. We don't say Highway 405 or whatever. But it's bad. I flew all the way to, I believe it was South Carolina, and I was staying in a hotel doing a training, and I got a shuttle. And the guy who was driving the shuttle, literally they said, we'll drive you anywhere on this shuttle between like 5 miles and back. I was the only person the whole week that was using the shuttle. The guy would stop at the grocery store for me if I wanted to. It was great. It was like having my own personal driver, and I didn't have to pay for him. But what cracked me up was when we were driving on the highway to this place that I was doing this training, he would comment about how awful the traffic was. And I'm going, I think I've seen 5 cars the whole time we've been driving 5 miles. And he was telling me how this place has grown up and all these places are coming into business around them and how the traffic's getting so bad. And I thought, I hope he never comes to California to see our traffic. He'll have to sit there watching the traffic instead of watching it go by while he's driving. But certain circumstances affect us differently, don't they? And sometimes it's based on just what we're used to. But those are the outward things or the external things that can be triggers and stressors. But we also have internal things. And this is where most of my clients have trouble recognizing, because we all have different personalities. One of my kids in the group home, I think, said it probably one of the best ways I've heard it. He was telling me one day there were 6 kids in each group home that I worked in, and he was telling me about all the other boys that were in the group home, and he started describing them as though they were Winnie the Pooh characters. And I don't know if you know anything about Winnie the Pooh, but he was saying, yeah, that kid's like Tigger. He's all over the place, bouncing off the walls and everything, lots of energy, and that one's like Eeyore. And I mean, he was pretty young. He was maybe 13 years old, and he just had a real sense of, hey, everybody's different. We all have a different, what we call baseline behavior. Some people are just more laid back. I have a friend, when she has any amount of time off of work, and she works a really rigorous schedule as a doctor, and she's doing notes in her off time, she's making calls, filling prescriptions, all kinds of things. If she has even a moment to spare, she's planning an activity with friends. I just look at her and I go, or hear her stories, and I'm like, I'm exhausted just listening to your life. It's tiring. I'm tired when I'm done working. And I love retreating and going home and just being my husband and I on our property and everything. And I love the only people I see are actually deer and turkeys. It's so nice. I love that. But she's off planning events and doing things. She's flying here, going there. And how do you have that much energy? Because we're all different. So because we're all different, though, we all have different personalities. And some of us have a tendency towards certain feelings. Don't you know people that just tend to be more depressed than other people? Maybe you've not been diagnosed, or they haven't been diagnosed, but they just tend towards being a little more melancholy. And then other people, they're just super energetic all the time. And you might even consider them a little manic, right? But each one of us has a default place that we go to. And we don't even need people and circumstances to happen for us to have certain thoughts and feelings that affect us. So I don't have to have it raining in order to feel depressed. Sometimes that depression just comes over me, and I don't know where it came from. All I did was wake up. Nothing seemed to trigger it from the outside. It seems to come from the inside. So those of us who do experience things like depression and anxiety, you don't always need a trigger, do you? You don't always need somebody to say something or something to happen a certain way. It's almost like depression and anxiety are like, wait, you forgot about me. I'm still here. Don't forget. And it just comes right back up. And for some people, it's important to recognize that your activating event doesn't need to be a person or a circumstance. It's just kind of internally there. Now, that's not a bad thing, because that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, what do you believe about those things? What do you tell yourself? So the B stands for belief. And we all have beliefs about the activating events in our lives. We all have beliefs about the people in our lives. We all have beliefs about the circumstances, the weather, the traffic, all that sort of thing. By the way, do you know, maybe, I don't know if this, I bet it happens here too. Do you know, can you think of a time when traffic wouldn't be a bad thing? Maybe a situation you'd be in where you wouldn't think so badly of traffic? Okay, if you're going to a fun event, you might be bothered that you're stuck in traffic, but what if you're on a date? And you know the date's going to end when you get her to the door or something like that, or he drives you to your house, and you get some traffic. You're like, ooh, we get more time together, right? Or sometimes, I know this has kind of happened with cell phones, but I hate to admit this, but I'm going to be vulnerable with you all. Sometimes I get a text message on my phone, and my car doesn't tell me and read it for me, and I see a light in front of me, and I see the light turn yellow. And normally, if it's turning yellow, I'm not that excited. I want green lights all the way there. But I know that yellow light means that the next light is going to be red, and I'm going to be stopped, and I'm going to have just enough time to pick up my phone, read it, and I might even get enough time to text a person back. Now, we're not supposed to be doing that. But if I'm driving a curvy road and I get to a stoplight or something, woohoo, I'm excited then. What changed? Was it the circumstances? No, it's still a red light. The only thing that changed is what I believe about it. And that is, ooh, I get a chance to do something I want to. Or even if you don't check your cell phone, have you ever dropped something on the floor? And you're like, I want to pick it up, but I know stopping at the stoplight, I'm going to actually have a chance to do it, whereas I'd have to let it roll around or something if that didn't happen. Isn't that amazing? It's my belief about the stoplight, not what is actually happening, that is the situation. I just looked at the screen for the first time. I realized that it didn't translate very well. But when we talk about our beliefs, another way of saying it, just like activating events can be triggers and stressors, our beliefs can also be considered thoughts or self-talk or our interpretation of the activating event or our perspective of the activating event, even of our judgment of the activating event. And what you can't see from the screen very well because it didn't translate, but all of these at this point are self-defeating and irrational. They're irrational and self-defeating. Why? Because we feel like a victim. We feel like a victim. But here's the thing, you don't have to feel like a victim because what you don't realize is this was a choice of what I believed about the situation. Now, we don't all recognize it as a choice. It doesn't seem like a choice when that thought pops up in your head or that belief pops up in your head. But what you don't realize is I didn't have to believe that thought that popped in my head. So here's the thing about thoughts. I want you to think about them in terms of you are going to have thoughts go through your head all day, every day. All day, every day. But what helps you with those thoughts is recognizing that you don't have to believe all of those thoughts. Do you know that? You don't have to believe them. So the problem here is when I actually believe the thought that comes into my head. So you can have a thought and read Mind, Character, and Personality more, and you'll understand this. But you can have a thought go through your head, and it can be a derogatory thought towards someone else. And then you can check yourself, and you can go, Amanda, why are you thinking that way? That's kind of a devilish thought to have. That only encourages what the devil wants to do in my life and in people's lives around me, not what I really want out of these thoughts. So I don't believe that thought. I'm not going to take that thought and I'm not going to believe it. I'm not going to go there anymore. It's like if you have a salesperson come to your door, do you have to let them in? Sometimes you can step back and get real quiet and hope that they don't hear anything and walk away, right? But what do we do when we have a thought? Oftentimes we're like opening up the door, letting it in, you can spend the night, do whatever you want here. And we don't realize I never had to open up the door for that in the first place. We don't have to entertain those thoughts, in other words. But as soon as we start entertaining them, we start believing them. But you can have thoughts that you don't believe. And if you don't believe those, if you choose differently, then you can be the victor versus the victim. But at this point in the equation, in the worksheet, what we're realizing is that most of these thoughts or beliefs that I've had are irrational and self-defeating. Now, how do we know they're irrational and self-defeating? Because of the consequences of them. So, if my belief, whatever it is, causes behaviors like self-harm behaviors, and you know what those look like. How about rumination? Does everybody know what rumination is? No. Rumination, you probably know this more so from the animal world. If you have a cow or sheep or goats, they ruminate, right? They take their food, they chew it up, they swallow it, and then what happens? Comes back up and they chew on it even more. Now, humans don't do this with our food. What do we do this with? Our thoughts. Something happens, I chew on it. I keep thinking about it. And then maybe for a second it goes away and I bring it right back up again and I start chewing on it even more. And the more I chew on it, 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 what does it do to me? It continues to affect me, right? And sometimes I feel things like anxiety. Sometimes I feel things like fear, depression, you name it. But I really need to avoid things like hopelessness, worthlessness. Now, this isn't the Christian kind of worthless. This is the I'm a horrible human being, I can't do anything right, the beat yourself up kind of worthlessness that we often have. And so we have other things. We do substances, even dissociation. Does anybody know what dissociation is? Dissociation, the most practical example I can give you of this is, what do you do when you're at the doctor's office and you're waiting? What's the first thing you do? Anybody want to take a guess? Read something? That would be nice. You pull out your cell phone. And you start scrolling and reading and looking at things, right? What am I doing? I'm dissociating from the present, what's going on right now, so I don't have to think about being bored. Sometimes we eat to dissociate. Sometimes people sleep to dissociate. Sometimes dissociation is a way that I don't have to end my life. Because ending my life, that's a really permanent thing to do. So what if I just sleep instead? And I sleep all day. Maybe I get up to grab something to eat, I go to bed, or I go to the bathroom, and then I go back to sleep again. And then I wake up again to eat, go to the bathroom, and then I go back to sleep again. And everybody in my life, wonders what to do with me because they never see me, except when I get up to eat and go to the bathroom. But I don't have to deal with all the problems in my life if I sleep. How about lack of creative problem solving? This doesn't look like a behavior because it seems like a lack of behavior, but even lack of behaviors can be behaviors. If I don't get out of bed, that's a lack of behavior, but I'm staying in bed. If I have a lack of creative problem solving, what am I doing? I'm giving up, right? So this is a behavior. And then the last one I'm going to share with you, I'm sharing the ones that I see most often that don't always look like behaviors to some people. But the last one, too, is, I think, an important one, and it's what I call hyper-focusing. You know, if I think I'm deprived, if I think like I don't get enough of things, what am I going to be focusing on all the time? What everybody else has, maybe. I'm going to go, see, I don't have that. They have that. See, I don't have that. She has that. See, I don't have that. They all seem to have that. How come I don't have that? And I keep hyper-focusing on the things I don't have versus the things that I do have. And some of us do that. We spend so much time hyper-focusing on something that what does it mean? I'm not focusing on the important things in life. How can you when you're hyper-focusing on this, right? So these are the consequences. So if you notice on this sheet where I have the blue arrow and the pink arrow, the blue arrow suggests that when I have an activating event, I have a choice as to what I believe. But the pink arrow represents that once I believe something, I have no choice to what the consequences are. Because whatever you believe, it's going to come out in your behaviors and your emotions. Now, sometimes it doesn't sound like it's logical, but hear this. So if I believe that everybody, I don't know, has a better life than I do, or no, let me use this example. If I believe that I'm inadequate, or I don't measure up to what other people are and who they are, what kind of behaviors can I have? Well, on the one hand, I could have the behavior of I just don't try, I don't go out, I don't socialize because I don't want to face all the people in my life that seem to be better and have more than I do. But if we swing the pendulum to the other side, what can it look like? It can look like overcompensating. Maybe I buy a lot of things to try to make up for the lack of feeling good enough. And so I buy more clothes, I have a nicer car, I spend money even on things that I don't have the money for. Because I'm trying to compensate, it's still the same belief, but I can swing this way or I can swing this way with it. And sometimes what we do is we don't just swing one way, we swing one way one day and then the other way the next day. We give up and then we swing trying too hard. And then we swing giving up, and then we swing trying too hard. And this is something that we do, but what do they both say? Either way, it tells me that what I'm believing is something not healthy. And by the way, sometimes my clients will say, how do you know what I'm thinking? And I'm not psychic. I mean, I know I'm not psychic. But when you do this long enough, all I need to know is how you're feeling. And by the way, you don't have to have somebody tell you how they're feeling. It comes out in your affect. All your exterior will tell you sometimes what somebody's feeling. And then what are you doing? And I say, are you doing this because of believing this? And they go, how did you know? But you all can do this too. Did you know that? I'm not encouraging you to go out there and tell people what you think they're believing. But if you can see this in other people, you can see it in yourself too. And so when there's an activating event and you have a belief, there's going to be consequences that are going to show you what the belief is. The fourth thing, though, actually, let me go back a second. A through C is the problem. We have activating events, the belief about it that's irrational and self-defeating, and then the consequences. And by the way, if you're not sure you have an irrational or self-defeating belief, just look at the consequences in your life and you'll be able to tell pretty quickly. But if you don't do anything about it at this point, all you're going to do is cycle A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C all day long, every day. Maybe you'll skip a day, maybe you'll skip a week or a month or something, but you'll keep cycling through it. And you'll see a pattern in your life. And some people say, why is this always happening to me? That might be the reason, because you're going A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. So the D and the E are the solution. So let's look at the D. The D, this is where we use something called Socratic questioning. It's just a technical term in therapy we call, because remember, Socrates was a philosopher, and philosophers love to do what? They love to ask questions. They don't always love to get to the solution, because as soon as they get close, then they ask more questions, and it just keeps going. But Socratic questioning is just asking questions. And the reason we do this is because sometimes if you're experiencing an irrational belief, if I just tell you, oh, that's crazy, why do you believe that? You're not going to change the belief just because I told you that. But if I can ask you questions, this is actually a biblical method. Did you know that? When Jesus met people, did he just come out and tell them things all the time? No, he would use questions. He would ask questions. Think of the woman at the well, right? He would use questions, because there's something powerful when you don't tell me what to think, but I figure out a different way of thinking because you've asked questions to get me to that place. So the first question we're going to look at, and there's many other questions that can fall into this category, but the first question we're going to look at is this true? Now, if I have the belief that I'm not good enough, most of us are not going to ask that question, is this true? We love to do something, and that is believe everything that we think, without asking, is this actually true? So, how do we know if something is true? Well, the Bible is a great way to tell us if something is true. We can check it with the Bible, but, maybe you don't know where to look. Another way to do this is look for evidence for your belief. Now, here's the problem with human beings. Remember, Monday I talked about, if you were here, Monday I talked about how to hack the human brain. Our brains love to look for safety and comfort, right? So another thing our brain likes to do is it likes to assume things without looking for evidence. And one of the ways we do this is we only look for the evidence that supports what we believe. So if I think I'm inadequate or not good enough, what am I going to focus on all day? All the mistakes I've made, all the ways people don't like me or have treated me a certain way. But what's the problem? I'm not looking at the evidence to the contrary. We don't like to be proven wrong when we have a belief. Did you know that? Try telling somebody the evidence that's contrary to their belief, and what do? They disqualify it, they say it doesn't count, they won't even listen sometimes because we don't like to be told what we believe is wrong. But if you want to be a wise person, I like to use this example. I used it last year too, as a new thing that I found. The Bible says that we are the what of the earth? Salt of the earth. If you've looked up that word, or if you were here last year, do you know what salt means? It means prudent. If you look it up in the concordance, it means prudent. I don't know why I never looked this up in so long. I think it's because it's such a simple word. You don't think there's another meaning for it. And so what we've often talked about in Bible classes and everything, we go, oh, it's preserving, or it's adding flavor and that sort of thing. Those aren't necessarily wrong. But when you hear that it's being the salt of the earth actually means prudent, or being prudent, that takes on a whole new concept. If you work with a prudent person and that person hears that, oh, can you believe so-and-so did this? What is a prudent person going to do? Are they going to automatically go, I cannot believe that happened to you. How dare they do that? What is a prudent person going to do? They're going to step back and they're going to wait till they get more information before they just start making judgments. They're not going to just accept anything that somebody says. They're going to look at both sides. They might even go talk to the person and say, hey, I heard this happened. You want to tell me what happened on your side? That's what prudent people do. Anybody in here want to be a prudent person? So what happens when you have a belief, and that belief is causing all kinds of consequences that are negative, and you know, oh, I want to be a prudent person. I have to look at the evidence for my belief, but I also have to do what? Look at the evidence against my belief. That will make you a prudent person. That's why we have judges, right? And if you're a good judge, what are you going to do? You're going to stop when one side gives their testimony? You're going to listen to both sides, right? You're not going to make a judgment before that. You're going to listen to everything you have in front of you before you make a decision. Now, here's the third thing that we have to do with evidence, though. What do judges do when they don't have enough evidence? They dismiss the case. Yes, they dismiss the case. Why? Because they don't have enough evidence. And they'll even sometimes say, come back when you have more evidence. Do you know we don't like to do that? We don't like to suggest, oh, I don't have enough evidence. The human brain, when it has empty spots, we like to fill it in with stuff. That's why you're supposed to have multiple witnesses in a courtroom. Because if one person says it, that doesn't automatically mean it. We have all kinds of biases when we think about things. By the way, we even have false memories sometimes. If I want to believe something so much, I can have a false memory to endorse that belief. So we need multiple witnesses. So that's the same with us. And that's the case too when I have a belief. If my belief is nobody likes me, have I had anybody tell me that, or is it just a feeling that's come over me? If I don't have anybody saying anything, and by the way, I have learned, I'm not the oldest person in the room, but I have learned in my years that not even the things that people say do they always believe. So somebody can come up and say, I hate you, and maybe they don't actually hate you. Maybe they hate what you represent to their lives because they're not the same as you. You have something they don't have, and we call those haters. People who don't like other people because they're better than them, and they don't want to admit it, and so they just hate on them instead. Being a prudent person means asking if it's true and being willing to look at all the evidence, or recognizing I don't have enough evidence, and I'm going to put that to the side until I have more evidence. I'm not going to make a judgment about this. I'm not going to have a belief about this until I have more evidence. How about the next question? Is it helpful? Why do you think we ask that when we've already asked if it's true and we've looked at all the evidence? Because sometimes things are true. Maybe I lost my job. I told you yesterday, if you were here, that I didn't lose my job, by the way. Does anybody want to know another part of the story I forgot to share with you yesterday? Do you know my boss wound up getting fired? I forgot to share that with you. So 6.5 years after I go through that whole turmoil, I was there for 7 years, about 6.5, I don't know exactly, but about 6.5 years after I gave him the gift and the card, he wound up getting asked to leave. I don't even know the details of it. No, none of us knew. He was just told to, move on, find another job. I think they gave him something to, whatever they do. And I thought, yeah, like a severance or something like that. But it was only like a 2-week thing. I don't know all the details. And I thought, wow, I outlasted him. But I've had other situations where I actually got fired. I know that's a really vulnerable thing to tell a group of people, but I've been fired multiple times. Now you're going to start, well, no, that's jumping to conclusions, isn't it, Amanda? But you might be thinking, what happened? If you want to hear, I'll tell you later. But I lost my job 3 times. Or was it 4? No, it was 4. I lost my job 4 times. I call it fired. Anyway, what would have happened if I kept repeating to myself, Amanda, you've been fired. Amanda, you've been fired. Amanda, you've been fired. Is that not true? Do I not have 4 evidences of that happening? How helpful is it for me to tell myself that? What happens when you're listening to a sermon and the person next to you says, hey, what did he say? And you turn to tell them what the pastor just said or what Amanda just said. What happens? You miss the next thing that was said, right? And that's the same case when you don't ask yourself, is this actually helpful? If you're just repeating that over and over and over to yourself, even if it's true, how helpful is it? If I fail a test and I just keep repeating to myself, I failed the test, I failed the test, I failed the test, it's awful, I failed the test, I failed the test, what am I not doing? I'm not learning how to take tests better. I'm not asking the teacher for help or saying, hey, what do you think would help me do better on this test? I'm not getting involved with a tutor or something like that to do better in the class if I'm struggling with the concepts. That's the problem with not asking myself, is it helpful? And the reason we do this is because we want to move forward. We don't want to stay stuck in the place that we are. And I've met many, many people who are still living like that thing happened because they're not moving forward from it. They just keep repeating to themselves, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. And they almost go into a catatonic state. If you don't add anything more to your brain, you're just going to keep practically rocking back and forth. This is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. And we see people like this sometimes who they can't tell another story. The only story they can tell is what happened. Sometimes we see people, they're not moving forward in their life because all they're doing is reminding themselves of that thing that happened. I've seen marriages fall apart because of this. Maybe a child died. I've seen kids feel neglected and abandoned by the parent who lost a child, and the parent is so focused on that child that they don't realize, I have other children who need me. And they're stuck with that death and that loss, and they can't move forward. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for grief. Please do not hear me say that. What I'm saying is there's a way to grieve well. And by just repeating the loss over and over and over again, all you're doing is re-inflicting yourself with that trauma. And some of us have been traumatized by other people. And all we're doing is taking their weapon and continuing to beat ourselves with it, even though they're not there anymore. And this is the case when I see people who experience abuse. They're so focused in what happened. And I understand the pain and suffering that goes with this. I see it all the time. But please do not give that perpetrator any more power in your life, even though they're gone. Please do not do that. That doesn't honor and glorify God. It only honors and glorifies the satanic behavior that they did to you. And we don't want to do that. But when we recognize that things aren't, what we're telling ourselves, what we believe either isn't true or isn't helpful or both, then we have to reframe what we tell ourselves. And I already talked about reframing. Remember what reframing is? If you're building a house, it's very important that you get the framing right. But if the framing is off, you need to reframe it. You don't want to build over it and chance that it's not going to be built well. And that's the same with our thinking. Many of us have poorly framed thoughts and beliefs. And we keep building on those thoughts and beliefs even though they're not working well for us. And our behaviors reflect it. I have to compensate more in this behavior. I have to do more of this thing. I'm constantly feeling this way because I haven't changed the way I framed my thoughts. And so we have to reframe it. That's what we're talking about when we talk about reframing. I have to change the way I think about this. And then when you do that, and by the way, if you want to Google, I like metaphors. If you look at the 10 commandments, how many commandments do we have? 10. But if you boil those 10 commandments down, there's 2, right? So I've just given you the 2 questions to ask yourself. But if you want to expand to 10 questions, Google 10 ways to untwist your thinking. And you'll get 10 questions. So some of us, we need a lot more help, and that's okay. This is the first time or maybe the first few times that we're doing this, so we need a lot more help. So Google 10 ways to untwist your thinking, and you'll get 10 questions that you can go through to help you. And so when we do that, I forgot. I'm going to share with you some verses to reinforce what I've just shared with you. James 1:2-4 says, "Count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete," something I've mentioned this week, "lacking nothing." Is this not a reframe of the things that we go through that might be considered trials in our lives? And I talked about this yesterday when we go through pain. This is a reframe. The Bible is showing us how to reframe trials. Count it all joy. Now, here's the interesting thing. It's not telling us to do it, and we're the only ones that have to do it. Look at this. Or not. Here we go. Hebrews 12:2 says, "We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne." So Jesus even did this before us. Did he not count it as joy to go to the cross? Did he not reframe that trial? Why would he count it joy to go to the cross? Maybe because we'd be in heaven with him one day, and he focused more on that than the pain, the physical pain, the emotional pain that he was experiencing. So we're to count it as joy, but knowing that Christ already counted it as joy, what he went through. And after we do that, if I can get my clicker, I was doing so well with this thing. Oh, okay. Relax, breathe. Enjoy the sound of the rain, the soundtrack to my talk. Okay, here we go. So when we change our belief, when we reframe it to something that is true and helpful, then you know what's going to happen? We're going to have fewer negative behaviors, and we're going to have fewer negative behaviors and more positive behaviors, and we're going to have fewer negative emotions and more positive emotions. Now, this doesn't mean just because you change a belief that you're not going to be tempted to go back to the old one. Sometimes we're really tempted to go back and believe the old one. By the way, we know this because the devil doesn't want you to change your beliefs, right? Do you think he wants you to become a healthy individual that's preaching the gospel and being an example to honor and glorify God's word? No, he doesn't want that. So he's going to keep reminding you of those old ones. But it means that we reduce the negative things and we increase the positive things as we begin to believe that new belief. And as we do this, all these dramatic pauses in between, huh? It's not just the E that improves. The best part is that when you have new thinking, which affects you having new feelings and behaviors, do you know what also happens? The people in your life are going to be affected by it, and even the circumstances. So when you have people that trigger you all the time, are they going to trigger you so much anymore? No, you're going to look at them differently. Maybe you'll have some more empathy for them. Maybe you'll feel some sympathy for the things that they're going through in their life. You're not going to see them as the enemy. You're going to see them as somebody God might have put in your life to, refine you. And maybe even somebody that needs your help versus just focusing on how they affect you. But the other thing that happens too is I am not watering those old feelings and thoughts that I had before. I'm literally starving them because I'm not going back to them. And so what happens is they start to change, and I'm not the depressed, anxious person that I used to be. So the plant that you water is the plant that grows. The plant that you water and the plant that grows are the thoughts that you have that are affecting the feelings and behaviors. So this is what the sheet looks like, and now I'm going to tell you how to get this sheet, because I don't want to leave you hanging. I want you to be able to do this when you get home. And by the way, this is recorded, so you can watch it over and over again until you get it, right? So if you go to the Beautiful Minds webpage, I believe it's beautifulmindsmedical.com, and you see at the top right there, it says resources. It's circled in yellow. I don't know how good it is. Oh, can I laser it? Oh, there we go. Fancy. So right there, resources. Click on that. You will see this CBT trigger sheet, or the ABCs. Click on that, and you will be able to download it. And you can have as many of these sheets as you want. You will have to print them out, but you'll have as many as you want. But you don't even have to do that. You can just write A, B, C, D, E across the top of your page and do them on your own as well. I want to end with this thought. You should acquire habits of self-control. Your imagination was not given you to be allowed to run riot and have its own way without any effort at restraint or discipline. And get this, if the thoughts are wrong, that's the top of the triangle, the feelings will be wrong, and the thoughts and feelings combined make up the moral character. And how do we know somebody's moral character? Their behaviors, right? And is this not cognitive behavioral therapy? And this came along a long time before 1960, right? So this is endorsed by the Holy Spirit. This is Holy Spirit thinking. This is Christ-like thinking. And in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 3, I want to share, because sometimes people wonder, why do you do this, Amanda? I love helping people overcome whatever mental illness, whatever trauma, anxiety, depression, whatever you're going through. I love doing that, but ultimately, the reason why I do this is because I want everybody to be prepared. We've got even harder stuff coming ahead. If we don't get the thinking part right now, it's going to be that much harder when all this stuff comes along. So I want you to be well equipped for what I consider the last battlefield that we're going to have to deal with on this earth, and that is the mind. Satan, he can do all kinds of things to the body, but what about the mind? You're not the same person when your mind is different. And I want you to be well equipped. And it says, but I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety or cunning, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. This is why I do what I do. This is my motivation. This is my passion. This is my God-given duty on this earth. I want to equip all of your minds to be the healthiest minds. I want to build up our churches with healthy, loving, Christ-like people. And I want us to know how to deal with hard things. Because we're promised we're going to deal with hard things, right? And if you didn't hear at the very beginning of this week, I am part of a podcast called the Brain People Podcast. I'm one of 4 brain people, if you want to call us that. And the most recent one just came out, and I did an interview with the mother of somebody who might even be here at Campmeeting. So if any of you have heard of Barbara O'Neill, I interviewed her for the last podcast that just came out, and so you can watch that. You can listen to it wherever you find podcasts. And I just thank you so much for allowing me to share with you. And I pray that each one of your minds will be fortified, strengthened, encouraged, and inspired. Let's bow our heads. Dear Father in heaven, I thank you, Lord, for times like these where we all get to come together to encourage and exhort one another. I thank you, Lord, for the rain, the beautiful sound of the rain. And I ask, Lord, that just like the rain, that you would send your Holy Spirit into each one of our hearts and minds, that we would be made more like Christ. That's ultimately what we want to do and who we want to be like. And so, Lord, as you do this, we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.